it make you feel small and stupid? Because it's supposed to. All of these fantastic things that you would never know otherwise. Most horrific financial crises that we have seen. Money's involved, trust no one. Now absolutely terrified of me to my core. This was definitely not legal.
Hi guys, and welcome to our podcast. So today we're going to be talking about common resources. So common resource is an economic good that all individuals can access freely and whose value to the individual consumer decreases as others use it, meaning that it is rival and non-excludable. So this rivalry aspect of common resources brings us to the subject of the tragedy of the commons. So this is essentially a kind of phenomena against Adam Smith's position that the invisible hand of capitalism will guide consumers to ultimately act in favor of society as a whole. However, this is in contradiction to it. So there's a great article called Tragedy of the Commons by Clayton Broga, and she's basically explaining all of this and how with common resources, our individual interests will always trump that of societies, and we can see this most clearly within our environmental problems. And there's another article called Rethinking Environmental Controls, Management Strategies for Common Resources by Carol M. Rose, and it's basically stating that the most prolific example of the tragedy of the commons is that we are just destroying our environment in favor of individual interest, in complete disregard to what are the future outcomes.
So the only way to really solve this is by either privatization or self-regulation. So privatization would basically mean a firm or an individual buys a lot of land or airspace or water, and they are able to regulate all the people who come onto the property and take things from it, such as fish or trees. The other way to also regulate the problem of the tragedy of the commons is by self-regulation or within a community. So everyone within the community who has access to the land which is being taken from would be able to come to an agreement that everyone should have a bit of the land, so that not one person would take up everything and all of the resources would be taken.
So one of the main examples of the tragedy of the commons is overfishing. So what have people done to mitigate this problem? So governments have imposed, for example, quotas and fishing nets to ensure that each fisherman is accountable. As Saibh already said, there are a lot more solutions to this problem. However, it is by no means a simple one.
The tragedy of the commons can also be a social problem, which means that it would lead to a monopoly in any free market that the resources were sold in. It would just mean that if you think about the community, you would have to prioritize others over your own desire for more money, because you can make more money off of all the common resources that you are collecting from the environment.
So as we can see from this study of this topic, this flows not only into economics but into sociology and how we are all responsible for this, and just really shows how complex this problem is. So sad to leave on a negative note, but we'll see you back for public goods. Hi guys, and welcome back to our podcast. So today we're going to be talking about public goods.
So public goods are non-excludable and non-rival, which means that you don't have to pay for them, but you'll still be able to get them, and you can use it while someone else is using it. So there's never any competition, and you get it for free.
So there's been long-standing tension between public goods, the economic and the environmental purposes of public goods. In the article Valuing Public Goods by Philip Graves, public goods are notoriously undervalued, not only because people, when offered or willing to pay for the upkeep of these public goods, they are only thinking about their individual interest and not the cumulative market interest, but also because of this free rider problem. Now, the free rider problem is basically when someone can avail of a resource without having to pay for it. And while this can be quite negligible in the grand scheme of things, this article shows that with even just a small percentage of free riders, there can be a large decrease in percentage of the amount people are willing to pay for it. Furthermore, we can see this environmental and economic tension even more because of the low income generated by those who are most interested in public goods. This is because while income is basically the purpose of income is to get avail of private goods and leisure, but private goods most importantly. However, these people who prioritize public goods, income will not get them essentially what they want, and they will be way more interested in this upkeep, which generates little income but also generates a lot of leisure, which is their main priority. And so this is generating even more problems and tension between both of these communities.
Yeah, so everyone in the community would be completely unwilling to pay for a good which they can ultimately get for free, because they know that someone would be benefiting from their money when they don't need to be. And this person who's benefiting, sometimes it might be a better good than the public one, but if you can still get it for free, no one will be willing to pay for it.
So the solution that essentially seems to be the only viable one is essentially acquiring public goods as you would private goods. So this is the solution posited by Philip Graves in the article Valuing Public Goods. But not only that, but there is a real life example of this in the book Microeconomics by Austin Goolsbee, Stephen Levitt and Chad Siverson. They mention the example of firefighters. So firefighters in America, that is notoriously known that they are extremely expensive upkeep, and there's basically a town surrounding another main town, and the town surrounding another main town were notorious for not paying the upkeep of this firefighting service. However, when a fire did happen in this surrounding town, most people believed that firefighters would act in accordance with their morality and they would put out this fire despite them not paying for it. However, this didn't happen because the firefighters, as explained very eloquently in this book, Microeconomics, they knew that if they actually started putting out that fire, that would lead to a very large decrease in the amount of income or revenue they would generate from people paying their taxes to the firefighter service. So they let it burn, which is a very cold-hearted thing to do, but ultimately is something that we need to realise, and of the kind of importance in money and the differentiation between public and private goods.
So the firefighters decided that they wouldn't want to put out the fire for free because they knew that if they did that, the people would continue to not pay for the service that they are providing. Therefore, they just let the fire run.
So again, we're dealing with a very complex problem that seems to only lead to a privatization of these resources. However, evidently there will be a lot of protest regarding this solution. So essentially, we'll leave that up for you to decide whether we should privatise these common resources and public goods, or we should let this happen. Obviously there is no correct answer, but all opinions are welcome.
Hi, my name is Rachel Madden, and in this section of the podcast, I'll be discussing the concept of merit goods. So to start off, what exactly is a merit good? According to Richard A. Musgrave, who first proposed the concept, they are goods that are considered so meritorious that their satisfaction is provided for through the public budget, over and above what is provided for through the market and paid for by private buyers. So what exactly does that mean? Put more simply, they are goods which the government encourage people to consume more than the free market would lead them to, because they are more beneficial than people realize. But why doesn't the free market encourage us to consume these goods? Why do consumers not value these goods as highly as they should be valued? Consumers may have imperfect information about the benefits of these goods, and so they are not valued appropriately and are underinvested in. There are two types of imperfect information. The first, information failure, is when the information is not available or clear, or perhaps the consumer simply chooses to ignore it. The other, asymmetric information, is where the information does exist, but it is not shared equally between two parties. When consumers have imperfect information, they must make irrational decisions, and so the government can create incentives to encourage them to make a particular decision for the benefit of both the individual and the population. This is an example of intertemporal choice, which, according to Mankey and Taylor's economics, is where decisions made today can affect choices facing individuals in the future. According to Kaujik Bazu's article, Retrospective Choice in Merit Goods, there are two main reasons as to why a retrospective decision may not be the same as an actual decision. The first is that tastes may change with experience. This is what John St. Mill meant when he wrote, "The uncultivated cannot be competent judges of cultivation." The second reason, according to the article, is that experience may reveal to the consumer that what he had initially thought to be the effects of the choice he made were quite different in reality. To put all this into context, let's look at the example of education, a common merit good. When attending university, we've all made the decision to sacrifice potential earnings we could have made during the years we were studying. However, there are others who do not see the long-term benefits of attending university and getting a better education. There is imperfect information because we cannot know exactly the benefits that further education can give, such as how much of a higher salary we will receive. For this reason, the government gives undergraduate students subsidized fees as an incentive to encourage students to attend university. So what are the benefits? For the individual, they are more likely to end up in a well-paid job with a better standard of living. However, there are social benefits too. If people earn more, they will pay more taxes and spend more on national products, causing the economy to grow and the country to benefit as a whole. The private benefits will always be less valuable than the social benefits, because social benefits will include the full information for consumers. The idea that consumers will be making rational decisions to consume at the right level and will include any positive externalities in consumption. Underconsumption will lead to a welfare loss and essentially market failure. Another example of a common merit good is insurance. There's imperfect information as we do not know if or when we will need insurance, and the prospect of saving money every month, which we could potentially be wasting on an accident that won't happen, is enticing. In cases like these, the government typically intervenes. For example, in most countries, it is mandatory to take out car insurance. So far, I've talked about problems relating to goods which are underconsumed. However, there are some goods which cause problems if overconsumed. These are called demerit goods. Mankey and Taylor defined demerit goods as goods that are overconsumed if left to the market mechanism, and which generate both private and social costs which are not taken into account by the decision maker. In the case of demerit goods, the private benefit is greater than the social benefit. However, the private and social costs are extensive. An obvious example would be goods such as tobacco and alcohol. The private cost is the damage the goods are doing to the health of the individual. However, the imperfect information is that the consumer may not know the extent of the damage it is doing. The social cost is the effect the goods are having on the health system. More people fall ill every year, and so more funding is needed for hospitals and staff around the country. Again, the government may intervene and impose taxes on goods like these to discourage consumption. So to conclude, the problem at the heart of market failure and the reason for both merit and demerit goods is information issues. The solution? We cannot leave it to the free market to encourage or discourage consumption. The government in many cases must intervene. However, this of course has sparked many debates over the extent at which we can allow the government to regulate the population's spending. As Thomas Mann said, everything is politics. Thanks for listening.
Will we ever achieve a climate neutral Europe? and will half the population of the world reap benefits from a COVID vaccine that they didn't take? Well, within the scope of so-called technical externalities, that is, the indirect effects have an impact on the consumption and production opportunities of others, but the price of the product does not take those externalities into account. As a result, there is a need to provide companies with some incentives to consider the indirect developments of, for say, high carbon emissions. And in the case of pollution, which is a traditional example of a negative externality, a polluter makes decisions based only on the direct cost of and profit opportunity from production, and does not consider the indirect cost to those harmed by the pollution. Those indirect costs which are not borne by the producer or user include decreased quality of life, say in the case of a homeowner near a smokestack, higher healthcare costs, and foregone production opportunities. For example, when pollution harms activities such as tourism, damaging buildings and statues. In short, these are known as negative externalities. There has always been a lot of speculation on how to tackle high carbon emissions from companies. And in Europe, we have adapted the EU emissions trading system, and it works on a cap and trade principle. So a cap is set on the total amount of certain greenhouse gases that can be emitted by installations covered by the system, and the cap is reduced over time so the total emissions fall, of course, intending to reach a neutral emissions Europe. Within the cap, companies receive or buy emission allowances, which they can trade with one another as needed. They can also buy limited amounts of international credits from emission-saving projects around the world. The limit on the total number of allowances available ensures that they will have a value. The flexibility of the system has also been much debated for quite some time, but beneficial externalities have arose from it. A robust carbon price also promotes investment in clean, low-carbon technologies and has seen a great development in that sector. Solidia Tech, which is a cement and concrete technology company, is a great example of this. Its modern technology has the potential to eliminate a minimum of 1.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide each year. It provides two core technologies: a sustainable cement manufacturing technology, which can be produced in traditional cement kilns using less energy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions during manufacturing by 30-40%, and also a sustainable concrete curing technology, curing concrete with CO2 instead of water, which could potentially save 3 trillion litres of fresh water every year. Solidia Tech is only one company of many that has evolved so much in response to the green movement. But returning to externalities in our current climate, the anticipation of Pfizer and Moderna's new vaccine cannot be overlooked. A program of vaccination against flu virus or any other disease protects those who receive it from the risk of contracting the virus. But if 60% of the world took the vaccine, and that was enough to achieve herd immunity, assuming that there is a price on the actual vaccine, wouldn't the people who avoided the vaccine also be beneficiaries of the lower risk? As they never paid for any vaccination, yet they reap the benefits of a COVID-free world. Health services also benefit because there is a reduced probability that the hospitals will run out of staff or ICU beds for the sick patients, hence they run much more efficiently. And it could also be said that sectors such as tourism, hospitality and retail will benefit greatly from a COVID vaccine, as it will lead to an increase of customers and, of course, less lockdown restrictions. I would characterize externalities as consequences that are initially unimportant to a seller. Companies like Solidia Tech wouldn't exist if governments didn't present any merits in being energy efficient. Similarly, Pfizer will be much more concerned in simply selling the vaccine than the subsequent restorations to life that will proceed. A Pfizer vaccine alone will likely end up selling close to $14 billion worldwide, according to Damien Conver, the director of Healthcare Equity Research and Equity Strategy at the firm Morningstar. The intervening of the governments might help us achieve a climate-neutral world by 2050 is hoped. In respect to the COVID vaccine, there is a foreseeable, arduous task that governments must tackle in encouraging the use of the COVID vaccine by the population. I've been James Delaney. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Sarah, and I'm here with Tara, and today we're going to be talking about asymmetric information for our podcast. Asymmetric information is, just to crack on into it, is like a section of information and behavioural economics. So I guess before we start talking about asymmetric information, an important principle for this is an important theory for this is you've got a principal and an agent.
In my mind, I think of it as being agents in Hollywood. The agent is the person who is doing the work, basically, or they're the one who wants things done. They're doing it for you.
Asymmetric information is kind of based on trust and motivation.
It's two people using what the imbalanced information that they both have. So everyone has different information. One person knows more about something and the other person knows less. And they're trying to get a job done, whether that is buying a product or providing a service and stuff like that.
So then information failure is when one person possesses, the agent and or the principal possesses greater knowledge than the other.
Some of the examples that we were reading about in our book and on the other sources that we've used that should be linked below were workers knowing more than the employer about how much effort they put into their job. So when I'm at work, I know exactly how much time it takes me to send one email or to take an order, and my employer has absolutely no idea. So they're paying me based on kind of a guess of how much effort I'm putting in. So that's a really good example of asymmetric information and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then even on the flip side of that, you can say that the employer could pay a wage to an employee more or less than what they deserve if the employee doesn't necessarily know what they should be getting for that job. This all leads nicely on to talking about the moral hazard. Mm-hmm. Or a moral hazard, which a moral hazard is when the agent carries out work on behalf of the principal and the principal cannot monitor the agent's behaviour. Theoretically, the agent could be doing bad things on behalf of the principal wouldn't know about, and because they don't have the knowledge to question it or to work against it in any way, then they might be getting bad things might be happening to them in any kind of sense.
They're totally getting ripped off by this person because they can't. It's basically what I said before when I was talking about how I could say it takes me 20 minutes to send an email when it would really only take me 10. That would be my employer getting ripped off by the moral hazard that I have provided in that case.
So we talked about moral hazard, and the thing that can then lead to is adverse selection, which is where the principal actually knows more about the situation than the agent. And then the thing about that, obviously, is the agent would most likely prefer to know more about the principal because then they can rip them off.
Yeah.
And may not then do business with that particular principal or different groups of people, which obviously causes a lot of problems.
So in terms of the responses to both of these issues, moral hazard, it says, employers can respond in multiple ways. Obviously, they don't want these things to happen. They don't want to get ripped off. They want to be, getting as much productivity as they can. So the things that they would do and put in place would be things like monitoring them. So one of the examples that was written was talking about nannies having video cameras hidden around the house by the parents so that they can catch any behavior that they don't want to be happening, any laziness, any risk that the child is going to be in that the nanny might not have told the parents about or wouldn't tell the parents about.
So, I mean, thinking about all this, one of the most interesting things I think I found from all this was then the lemons problem.
I also like the lemons problem. Yeah,
it's a really weird name.
I love the name. I think it's so interesting. Yeah. I was really surprised to see fruit coming up in the middle of our economics book, but they use the example of the market for used cars, which I really liked. So it was talking about how a good used car would cost $10,000 while a bad used car would cost $4,000. So if it's really high mileage or it just doesn't work, you don't know which is which. You have no idea if you're buying this amazing car like they're saying it, or if you're buying an awful car but they're saying that it's amazing because they want the money. Kind of going into that market to buy a new car, you're already apprehensive because you know that there's something wrong here and they're not telling me what it is.
Yeah, and I read a really interesting thing I'll probably link it, or I think might have been a video that I watched about it, which I really liked, which is that because of the fact that people don't want to get ripped off, they will only and they might go okay, well, they're used cars, so I'm not going to pay that much. And the sellers that have good cars know that, and then the sellers that actually have good quality cars won't enter into the market because they know they're not going to get a high enough price, because the buyer won't go over a certain price because of their perceived perceptions of the market. So then what happens to the market is obviously that there's all the good cars leave, so you do actually end up with,
it's dominated by these lemons, more or less.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
All there is, and it's really hard to find a good car.
What we've kind of talked about a lot is the fact that the buyer or the principal in all these scenarios needs to go and educate themselves, or find this information from somewhere so they don't get ripped off by the agent. So that leads us on to signaling, which is when an informed party reveals or gives information to a principal or to somebody else that maybe doesn't know that much, and they kind of educate them about something.
Yeah, exactly. So it's advertising was one of the main examples. When I watch the ads or they come up on TV, suddenly it tells you all of these awesome things, like how fast it can go and the mileage per gallon, or all of these things that I really picked a bad analogy here. I know nothing about cars. Kind of all of these fantastic things that you would never know otherwise, that would incentivize you to go and buy this particular car. They're conveying the information that they know as a company. They know how amazing their car is based on all of these other things, and they're giving that to you.
I also like the idea though that you could have in some case private signaling. I think that maybe a stock market is a good example for this. If there's 4 or 5 people that know what stock is going to go up or down on a specific day or a specific week, who would they give the information to, or who would they let know based on their own private stuff? Because I mean that definitely does happen. People, you read about the stock market, or people that were investing in stuff, and then a week later the price skyrocketed. And then suddenly they're millionaires, and you kind of think, did you really just randomly decide to invest in tube stocks?
Exactly. So it can lead to fraud and all of those things. And so when you were talking about this, it never really occurred to me until right now. But even with the pandemic that we're currently in with coronavirus, there were people who knew beforehand, and so knew the information before the population, obviously. And so the release of that information would have been kind of a good example of asymmetric information. What they based those things on, interests and investments and their currency value, all of those things have to be considered.
If you're thinking about the pandemic, especially in that scenario, there is absolutely no room for screening, which is where the uninformed party try to make an action, or they try to get the informed party to reveal.
They start asking all of these questions, saying give me something, please inform me. So that is the businesses at the moment who are sitting there going, can you please tell us when we're allowed to reopen, because we're going to fail as a business unless you do. And that would be screening. Exactly.
What that all leads nicely onto is asymmetric information, and what can we do to lessen it and to control it, and the public policy. What should the public policy be on asymmetric information? So I mean, I think there's a lot of complications with this, because if you say that there should be maybe governmental action or kind of legal action around this stuff, that obviously complicates the issue massively, because firstly, the government might not know everything can't know everything about everything anyway. And also, what if the government is the agent, like we've just talked about, and they want to control what information they give out? We talk a lot about this stuff, and the reason that moral hazards and adverse selection and all this stuff occurs is because people don't trust each other, and people know that not everyone acts in a morally good way.
Not everyone is morally righteous. I think that's really interesting. Even a few years ago with the WikiLinks thing, this kind of links to public policy, just in the way of me talking about of us discussing how governments would be able to divulge information, and should they and would they, all of those things. The WikiLeaks articles that gave out I think it was the Americans had spies in other countries, and this leak provided the world with that information. There was a lot of debate surrounding whether or not the privacy of those people was being protected. So it
Yeah,
was
exactly.
kind of, a lot of people said, well, we should know, or like the world should know what the Americans are doing in other countries and where they're secretly hiding people. Or like even Americans were saying very specifically, like, we should know what our government is doing in other countries and we should know everything that's going on inside, and it needs to be public information. This public information put a lot of people at risk. So can we regulate that? Can we prosecute the leaker of that for giving the information to the people when they also put at risk a certain percentage of these agents who were suddenly like in danger?
Like, this is a prime example of that, where like the dangers of releasing that information are arguably more severe than keeping it a secret.
So when we're talking about asymmetric information, just generally, is something that I've realized while we're talking is that there is no symmetric information almost anywhere. It's very difficult to find because asymmetric information is everywhere. It affects every part of our life. It's almost all of the information that you can possibly find is asymmetric in some way, because the person who wrote the article you're reading or the person that you're talking to about something knows more or less than you do. There's no, I think, two people who know the exact same amount about something, unless you're like working at NASA and you're like the top person there and you're like, this is as much as we could possibly know about this like universe thing.
And I guess like that is the problem then when you think about it in an economic sense of that, like especially because just what I researched for this is that like the idea that of there being asymmetric information in economics now absolutely terrifies me to my core. I mean, economists must hate it because it's, you know, human behavior.
It is a massive like psychology aspect, which is horrifying, I think.
Yeah, no, I know. So we get into our case studies. So I guess what we'll just preface this with saying was that when we were talking about asymmetric information, we were preparing for this podcast, we decided that what might be fun is if we both kind of went away and did some separate research on a topic or a couple of topics to do with asymmetric information, and then talked about it with each other, not really knowing what the other person had I'm
so ready. Please hit me with your information.
I'm also just going to preface this with saying that I'm talking about the financial crisis that happened in 2008. And it is very complicated, and I did read a lot, but I could get a couple things wrong because it is like, because we
are just first year economics students, we have no idea what we're doing.
I'm just a first year. Yeah. So have you watched the movie Big Short?
I feel like I have, yes. I can't remember very specifically, but yeah, I know what it's about. I'm there.
Yeah. So because I was watching this movie, and this movie is about the financial crisis in 2008 and what happened. The core problem that happened with the financial crisis in 2008 was actually asymmetric information on all levels. It was asymmetric information between the people that were buying mortgages and the investment bankers, but also there was a incredible amount of asymmetric information that was going on between the investment bankers themselves, the lawyers, and the government at the time. So what happened was investment bankers created CDOs, which stands for collateralized debt obligation. And in these CDOs, they fill them with subprime mortgages, which are basically the worst, like doomed to fail, horrible mortgages to people that just cannot pay them. The investment bankers started taking these risks and creating these CDOs was because they expected that the regulating authorities or the government or, you know, whoever would actually not allow the housing market to fail. What the banks did was they bundled a bunch of bad loans together with some good loans in a secondary market. And what that did was it basically hid the bad loans. The big question I was having when I was watching all this is like, how is this actually legal? Like, but really though, like you're giving loans to people in these CDOs, and you're not explaining to people what's in them, what's going on, what it means that they could go into default so easy, that the mortgages are subprime, all of this stuff. And the reason is because they didn't even know what they were selling. There were reams and reams of investment bankers that just didn't understand what kind of mortgages had gone into a CDO and how risky it was and how it could just fail. And this is like the most extreme form of asymmetric information, where the actual people
there's just
selling
no information. It's not even like asymmetric. It's like no one knows anything. Buy it. That's it. I was thinking it's a true story, but did come from a movie so similar to The Big Short. I was watching The Wolf of Wall Street because I'm a business major, and that seems to be something that happens. You have to be able to, I'm not at the level yet where I can, say it word for word, but I think that comes in third year. But I thought it was a good example of asymmetric information because the guy, Jordan Belfort, sold a penny stock scam, is like how he got his start was with the stock market and by ripping people off and doing like the opposite to what was happening with you. And you were saying, how is this legal? This was definitely not legal. There's a 100%, the movie ends with him like going to prison. But so this is not legal, but it does happen, and it did happen. And I think there are systems in place now to stop it, but we're going to just kind of look at what happened. And so that was Jordan became like, he was working at this investor center where he would sell penny stocks, which are basically like worthless. And he would buy loads of them himself, and then he would sell them for like double the price. So he knew that they were worthless, but the people did not. And he was making a 50% commission off of all of this stuff. And he set up his own firm and used a pump and dump scheme where he would, do exactly what I've just said. So you can have something that is absolutely worthless and is like a car shop. Oh my God, it's me and the car analogies today is fantastic. It's you could have something like the stocks for like some auto repair shop, and they wouldn't know why their stocks are rising, but it was literally just because people suddenly wanted them because this guy was, driving them home with all of the people that he was selling it to. And he even on top of selling people these worthless stocks, he would wait for them to rise because he was, selling so many of them and the demand was increasing. And then right as kind of they were peaking, he would sell all of his. And so he would make this huge profit. And that's how a lot of his wealth was generated. And that is a really good example to me of asymmetric information. He was this expert stockbroker who was able to kind of, and not only was he like an expert stockbroker, but he was also like a really great wordsmith when it came to explaining things to people, and like a salesperson. He was able to kind of drive these concepts home and relate to all of these really poor people who were, going to lose their house if they bought this many stocks and all of these things. He got people to take risks that they shouldn't have. And that was because he knew so much more than they did. And his expertise gave him the ability to say, hey, I know so much about this, trust me. And it gained him that trust in the market that he needed in order to profit from it. Thank you guys. I hope we didn't depress you too much with all of our kind of sad stories and the ideas and the fact that this entire concept just goes in circles.